You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. And now your footwear insiders, Matt Priest and Andy Polk.
Hey, Matt, how are you?
I'm doing well. Andy, how are you, my friend?
I am awesome. Feeling good today. Jasmine, how are you?
Fantastic.
Awesome.
Yes.
Matt, do you know what year Bob Dylan's times were a-changing, or are a-changing, or were a-changing, is a-changing?
Was it like 69, 68,
I guess
67,
so.
somewhere in there?
It's
My
like
father-in-law would be appalled if I don't know that.
Maybe he won't listen to this episode. We hope he does, but he might not listen to it. But I don't know. I mean, there was, I think it was Mark Twain who said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, right?
Right.
So I think this perpetual motion that we've seen even over the last 5 years, where consumers are shifting rapidly, footwear companies are changing rapidly, they're trying to find the right mix of, how do I know what the consumer wants so I make that?
Right.
Because, I mean, I would say for centuries we've made shoes that are mass retail. It's like one size fits all.
Yeah, black or brown or blue.
Right,
you want.
And then it moved into more modern age where they start making different types and styles and colorways, and the challenge has been getting the inventory right and making sure that you get a hot product out there that actually sells at the right price, or you're seeing, and with all the technology and everything like that, people are still struggling with figuring out what the right price is. I mean, we see this in the retail market data over the holidays, where discounting is just continually, what's how deep is the discount going to be versus something else, right?
Yeah.
But the good thing is there are companies out there working to help footwear companies figure out those things.
Yeah, they are, and that's who our next guest is. Greg Petro is president and CEO of First Insight. Greg is just a thoughtful guy who writes on Forbes. He's all over the place. I run into him on all these different locations, and he is just working his tail off on behalf of our industry and many other industries. And so, Greg, thank you so much for coming on Shoe and Show. We're so glad that you're here.
Thanks, guys. Really excited to be here.
Good. So let's dive right into it. Let's hear your elevator speech, Greg, on what is First Insight, and what do you guys do as it relates to servicing the footwear industry?
Yeah. So First Insight is the leader in customer-centric merchandising platform. We help retailers, manufacturers, and brands understand what consumers want pre-market, trying to help them determine what the right product mix is, meaning which products should they bring to market, which ones should they, not bring in the design phase. We help them do pricing, build the right assortments, and then target the right customers. So I think we're helping some of the largest footwear retailers and brands around the globe figure out how to solve some complex problems, all before they're making those big investments that they have to make to bring the shoes to market.
And so, as you think about those investments, what are the ways in which you help the brands understand, in particular, how to price things out, what type of shoes to offer, how do they, what types of shoes and what colorways and what functionality? Tell us, kind of walk us through the First Insight process as you help these companies get better data and better information before they even maybe roll out a product to the consumer base.
Sure. And Matt, to that point, it works the same for every company, whether it be, some of our customers like Polaris or Crocs or Camuto or Wolverine. We're taking products in the design phase, whether it be in 2D CAD, 3D CAD, or samples, and we're digitally product testing those with consumers pre-market. We then use a set of proprietary models, and the technology basically gives those individuals in each of those companies, whether they be the designers, the merchant buyers, or the planners, an understanding of which products are going to resonate, sell more, and which ones are likely to sell less. We actually create a forecasted average unit retail or average selling price. For those folks, those retailers in Europe that we're working with, they're trying to figure out what is the average selling price. For the folks in the U.S., especially given the political climate today and some of the challenges related to tariffs and the impact, they're trying to understand what's the AUR going to be and how can it be the sell-through be affected, or the sell-in even, in some cases, be affected by the increase in that price, and can we absorb it? And so all of that information is provided to those organizations and decision makers within 24 to 48 hours.
Wow, that
after
quickly.
We've tested.
Wow.
Yep.
And then what's the result of that? I mean, obviously you guys are giving, taking consumer bases that know and love the product in a traditional sense and showing them these things and then getting the feedback. How does that translate in the marketplace? Like what's the benefit of using your system in terms of better sales, getting the right price points, hopefully less discounting, right? I mean, that's the biggest challenge I think we all see.
Yep. So, we have, I think, a number of business cases that are a value delivery. One is obviously reduction in samples if you can do it in CADs and 3D CADs, and we're seeing that in some cases. So there's a cost reduction. But more importantly, it is sales and margin. And typically we see 400 basis points to 1,000 basis point improvement in comp sales, and
wow,
300 to 900 basis points in margin. We have examples, case studies on our website of our customers who have gone public. One recently, where the president stood up in an event. Actually, it was one of the FDRA events, and he talked about a 4% increase, which was interesting, slightly ahead of the market growth at 2.5%, but he did it on 40% less inventory.
Wow!
And I think the audience was pretty excited about learning more. So I think it's about asset utilization, and it's about increasing in sales and margin, and those are the ranges we typically see.
Greg, how often does one of your customers or one of your clients lowball a value and then they put it out there using the First Insight methodologies and engagement process and find out that they're underselling themselves and they need to jack up the price because the consumer is willing to pay more?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think we see a number, most retailers and brands and manufacturers don't think to themselves that they have the capacity to raise the price. But reality is they see it so often in the sell-through or the sell-out of the product, right? Which means they left sales and margin on the table.
Right.
And while they can convince themselves that, in general terms, and they're probably correct in some ways, if the total assortment can't be raised, there are clearly products within the assortment that are going to overperform. And the way to get the increases that we're talking about in sales and margin are really about, getting that competitive advantage of information and tilting the odds in your favor, because the essence is about, to your question, about the range is about 6 to 9% of all products we test could carry a higher price.
That's crazy.
That's
wow.
interesting. Greg, you've been doing this for a long time and look at the retail market constantly, and you constantly write for Forbes and other outlets. When we look at the consumer today, are consumers more fickle than they have been in the past? What's the difference in a consumer in today, a 2019, 2020 consumer versus 5 years ago?
Yeah, I think let's start with what they're similar, what they are similar, and then we can talk about how they differ.
Sure.
The one thing that all consumers have consistently shown themselves to operate within is what we call a value quotient, which is a product. When a company, a retailer, brand, manufacturer bring a great product to market and they price it accordingly, the consumer responds. And they see it through the uptick in sales and margin, and we see this across every product category, footwear included, right? The consumer knows a great value, but when we think about value, it's not always about a low price.
Right.
It is about quality, the consistency, the fashion capability. All of that goes into what is perceived value. And so I don't know in that essence that a customer, we as a consumer, have changed much, whether we're buying a designer luxury product or, that pair of shoes that just gets us to work. I think, and consumers are savvy. So what has changed is the savviness and understanding of information by consumers and the frequency at which they can get it. The smart device has enabled consumers in such a dramatic way to understand the what's going on in the marketplace as well as what's happening competitively and make choices. And to that question, I think around fickleness, their transaction cost to go someplace else has been reduced to almost zero. Mm-hmm. So if they find that product and they like it, or they find something even better, it really isn't hard for them to switch brands or switch retailers, right, and have it delivered the next day,
right,
and in some cases the same day. So all of that technology is enabling consumers to have the control that I think they probably always deserved, and now it's incumbent upon the retailers, manufacturers, and brands to engage them in a way and learn about what they want and anticipate it and be able to respond faster in an anticipatory mode as opposed to reactive mode.
Yeah. I think your point about pricing it correctly is dead on, because I think oftentimes, and we're talking about discounting and things like that. As a brand and company, you look at it and you say, okay, I don't want to discount too much, I want to do that. But there's also an issue with friction of purchase, meaning as a consumer, when you look at a product, if it's priced appropriately, that's less friction to say, I'm getting a good value, that's a good price point, I agree with that, and then you move forward. But if you price it incorrectly, they think either it's too cheap or it's too much. So the quality issue with that, it starts to create some kind of cognitive dissonance that creates this friction where it's not easy, right? We all want a consumer to come to our site or to our store, see a good product, understand the quality of it, see the price, say, yep, that's great, I want to buy it right now, right? 5-second purchase. But if you don't have the price right, it's not just about the discounting, it's the fact that somebody's going to sit there and weigh it in their mind whether they want this product or not. And then, to your point, go look somewhere else and say, I don't think that's the right price. I bet I can find it cheaper somewhere else.
Right. And that's exactly correct. I think the consumer has in their head individually a model that whether they think about it in that format, but the essence is they're saying there's a value I'm willing to transact on, a cost that I'm willing to transact on. Oh, by the way, that cost also includes waiting a day online as opposed to picking it up right there in the store.
Right.
I mean, all that comes into play when it comes to that transaction. At the end of the day, I think what most companies need to understand when it relates to pricing is they need a forward-looking view of what the product is going to bear from an average unit retail or ASP, or a price elasticity, right? How it's going to perform related to different price changes, so that they can be more nimble in the product in the market. It is, it's someone once told me a long time ago when I was in retail. I started in this business over 30 some years ago. It said, ours is, while we need to educate the consumer, it is clear they have a point of view, and if they want a promotional strategy, you can't take that away from them. But that's really grounded in your planned AUR and what you're going to forecast that item for over its life cycle. So it's really about trying to understand that more in advance than it is trying to report on it later.
Greg, let's dive into some points that you've recently made in a post that you had on Forbes about kind of looking back at 2019 and surveying your predictions and consumer behaviors, and then maybe we can pivot to 2020. But you talk specifically about millennials flocking to luxury brands, and then conversely, as baby boomers are getting older, they're starting to constrict their shoe spending, or their spending overall, I should say, and get more conservative as they head into their latter years. And so talk about the differing kind of cultural changes that we're seeing with millennials stepping up to the plate and becoming the driving force economically for retail, and then compare that to, you know, the departing baby boomer generation, and what can we expect, what differences are there, and how are they similar?
Yeah. So if you think about it, I started using the term flexing about luxury, and it was a term that came to me by one of my Gen Z children. He said, "Hey, Dad, you're going to Manhattan recently. You're going to have me. What brands are you going to be flexing?" And I didn't understand what that meant. And he said to me, it's about what brands are you going to show? And I think clearly what we see in luxury is that when the economy is increasing, improving in general terms, that people in total in the market are willing to demonstrate their success. And obviously when the market constricts itself, people don't want to be out there, showing off, so to speak. But I think where we are economically is certainly there are positive news in our economic information and what we've been reporting. And I think that's great news for millennials because, as you may recall, they struggled early in their career with 2008. Now coming into their own, what we're seeing is their willingness to adopt luxury brands is being reported pretty widely and increasing at a pretty good clip. So we have companies like LVMH in their portfolio doing quite well. And, some people call it the barbell effect, the other end of the spectrum. But I think in millennials, it is now about that acquisition and definition of themselves based upon where they are in their career and economic conditions with which they're being employed. At the same time, baby boomers are looking to, they also experienced 2008. We did, I myself being one of them, and watched our investments and, our retirement ebb and flow and come back. And now we're sitting back. And I think what we're observing and what we're hearing from consumers on the baby boomer side is, while I'm willing to still continue to expend resources at maybe even an aggregate level close to what it had been, clearly the investment side for baby boomers as they begin to look towards the twilight of their career and some of the forward-looking view is that they're looking to constrict that spending and increase investments. So I think that, and we see episodic investments in the home categories for baby boomers as well as millennials based upon where they are in certain stages. But I think as it relates to footwear, what I find interesting is that I think that there is still an enormous opportunity for retailers and brands both now at the baby boomer in that category, but at millennials. But what I would submit is one thing we find interesting is it also happens to be the hardest category to get the products right. New product success rate within footwear is amongst the lowest in all of the retail industry. So there's a lot of error rate happening where, we could certainly improve as a segment of the industry and bringing products to market and serving those customers properly. And it should be encouraging because millennials want to buy them.
Yeah, I hear you. I think that is encouraging. But as you think about millennials and then Gen Z behind them, the other thing you talk about is customers centricity and how customers react to different products in good and bad ways. And we have a very diverse country. We have 320, 330 million of us, and not all of us approach the same issue in the same way. That shouldn't be a shock to anybody. But the question for you is, you kind of point out the ability, you guys are you're in the business of going to market early to kind of test and react, which is so helpful on pricing and all these other things. How do you utilize what you guys do to ensure that you're touching the right cultural touch points, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's a great point. I think it's so salient in today's market. It really is an insurance policy. I've been speaking. I'm fortunate enough to talk to over 100 CEOs a year, and one of the things that I had mentioned recently about chief diversity officers, great idea. The strength of our country, the greatness of our country is in fact in its uniqueness, right, and its differences. And I think it's so beautiful how we knit it together when we do. At the same time, it allows each individual to have a strong point of view, right? Understanding that from a company perspective is very, very hard. And so what we see is mistakes occurring constantly in the marketplace. There was another one recently this past week, and I've written about it for several months now, that I think companies need to use their chief diversity officer or even their organizational structure in getting products in front of consumers in advance and trying to understand what they're missing, right? We recently tested a set of products, and I think there are very few, I believe fundamentally, that people aren't out to offend other people purposefully, but the unintended consequences of these mistakes are significant. In the tens of millions of dollars, and in some cases the effective market value in hundreds of millions. And without calling any of them out, because I think we could all find them, I think what I find interesting is what we're submitting to these leaders is put products in front of consumers and get a point of view. Make sure that you're looking at it from a number of different perspectives and scale it so that you're doing it across the product set, because we've been testing product. Recently we had one, and there was a hidden design that none of the executives saw, but a group of consumers had identified. Certainly would have been offensive. And I think there's ways to get insurance against these costly mistakes. Some great companies, Gucci's finally rebounding from some of their challenges, but it doesn't need to be that way in the future, right? Companies can simply put and scale testing in front of consumers in a way when they're ready to launch them, just to understand, the fat taming plates and all the things that they thought were great ideas that, are don't need to be.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly right. I think that's the thing is this idea of footwear companies making it's not a one size fit all, because obviously there's a million sizes of shoes, but the designs and where they place these shoes and how they market these shoes, it seems like it's, I don't want to say the word lazy, but it's kind of lazy if you're running a national campaign and you're not thinking about diversity, you're not thinking about even sections of the company, sections of the country, and how you sell to those different sections and the different prices and all those different things. Like, you can't, unless you're like a Walmart or something like that, you can't just slap a shoe out there and expect it to sell the same everywhere to everyone, right? So,
right.
Before we bring in
Jazz,
it's
a great point.
Go ahead.
That's a great point. And if I could just add one point,
Sure.
You'd say, well, I can understand how that could be more offensive in apparel or home categories, but just think about fragrance. And who would say you should be testing fragrance? But to your point, marketing campaigns and what recently was done in the Dior launch, that, it wasn't the product itself, it was the campaign and everything that revolved around it that had everybody up in arms, that they actually had to pull the Johnny Depp, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, look, we have the capacity, the technology to do these things. My point would be it's it's a small investment to get a large avoidance of pain.
Right. Right. I
Yep.
completely agree. Before we turn it over to Jasmine for her world-famous Fashion, Footwear, and Focus segment, just really quickly, ballpark 2024 for us here as you look at the overall retail environment and footwear. Are we going to see, there's this looming recession everybody keeps talking about, is a little bit worried about, and I think it's normal when things are so good, people start saying, my gosh, this can't last forever. But is 2020 going to be an okay year?
Well, I'd say, from our perspective, it is apparent that the infrastructure of the economy is in a good place.
Mm-hmm.
And the one challenge that we all know about is the upcoming election.
Right.
And the market and consumers don't like uncertainty. And I think as that becomes clearer, perhaps to people, and some pieces of uncertainty get clarified, I think there'll be obviously perhaps greater intention on the investment side from consumers and growth. I don't know. There's always the folks that say it can't last forever, but
Right.
we've had some economic expansion for some time now. And I think there's no reason to believe, no one really knows for sure.
Right.
Right? I mean, that's the point about the market. But at the end, I think one thing we do know is consumers do have a point of view of what they're going to spend. And we saw it pre-2008, lots of signals. And those signals are not in the same form that we're seeing today. So I would say, I would be cautiously optimistic at this point, but certainly on the optimistic side.
Good. That's great. That's great. That's good to hear.
That's
Makes
always
me
good
happy.
to hear. Yeah.
Jasmine, make me happy
Yeah.
with a fashion, footwear, and focus segment. Tell me something fashionable.
So
Make me smarter.
the Doc Martens, the original 1460 boot, is the shoe of the year. And I thought it was interesting because when I was in college, Doc Martens were maybe my junior year. I feel like they had resurfaced. I don't feel like they stay around. I mean, they stay around like a Chuck Taylor or something like that.
Right.
But has it always been like that, where it's been popular throughout you guys' lifetime? Has it had a heightened popularity over the years?
Yeah, I bought my first Doc Martens in 1994, and it was kind of the peak of the grunge, Seattle grunge, Pearl
Lollapalooza?
Jam, Lollapalooza, Nirvana, and so it was artist driven, it was cultural, music driven at the time. But I think
just
you're right.
Adidas, just how the superstars
I
were.
think
Okay.
so, and I
Okay.
think that it is an iconic shoe, like a Chuck Taylor, but. Like a Chuck Taylor, it also has these ebbs and flows, and I think
Right.
we're in the flow right now.
For sure.
And I think that's why it was shoe of the year.
Yeah.
That's one reason why I think people use First Insight is because some of these shoes do ebb and flow, and you've got to get it right. And the prices probably need to change to reflect that, right?
Yeah.
Supply and demand.
For
Am I
sure.
right, Greg?
Oh, absolutely. That's exactly right. I mean, it's not just about being in it. It's knowing when to get out of it.
Aha. There you go. I like that.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Well,
so.
I hope all our listeners never get out of shoes. I hope they double down in 2020, right?
That's right. Yeah, so with that, Greg, we can't thank you enough for coming on and giving us some insight into First Insight, because you are a thought leader in the industry and beyond, and we appreciate it. And thanks a ton for coming in and sharing some time with us.
Yeah, it was exciting to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, so folks, it's an honor to have you listen with us as well, and,
Yes.
and kind of grasp onto these concepts that we're trying to talk and bring these conversations to you. We ask that you go to shoeandshow.com to listen to this episode and all the episodes, and you can also get Shoe and Show at your local podcasting app. And rate us on iTunes.
5 stars.
We only accept 5 stars,
5 stars.
so nothing less than that will be accepted. We're sorry about that. But with that, I want to thank Greg again, and on
Yes,
behalf
thank you,
of
Greg.
Andy and Jasmine, Shoe and Show is out.
Shoe In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.